Before we begin this extraordinary journey through one of World War II's most remarkable yet heartbreaking stories, please take a moment to like this video if you find it compelling, subscribe to our channel for more incredible historical documentaries, and comment below to let us know where in the world you're watching from. Your support helps us continue bringing these forgotten stories to light, ensuring that the courage of those like young Sergei is never forgotten. In the early months of 1942, as winter's grip slowly loosened across the Soviet Union, the small village of Grin nestled quietly among the forests of the Kaluga region, some 200 miles southwest of Moscow. This remote settlement, home to fewer than 300 souls, existed in a world that seemed untouched by the mechanized terror that had been sweeping across Eastern Europe since Hitler's forces crossed the Soviet border the previous summer. The wooden houses, their foundations deep in the rich earth, had weathered countless seasons, their inhabitants living much as their ancestors had for generations, farming the land, raising livestock, and finding solace in the rhythms of rural life that had sustained them through czars, revolutions, and now the early tremors of what would become known as the Great Patriotic War. Among these families lived 6-year-old Sergei Andreevich Oleshkov, born on February 15, 1936, into a world that already bore the scars of loss. His father had perished before the war even began, leaving young Sergei to be raised by his devoted mother, alongside his 3 older brothers, Ivan, Andrei, and 10-year-old Petya. The boy was the youngest of the 4 siblings, a child whose laughter still echoed through their modest home, even as the shadows of conflict stretched ever closer to their peaceful existence. His mother, whose name has been lost to history, but whose love would prove instrumental in shaping the character that would soon astonish the world, worked tirelessly to keep her family together in circumstances that grew more challenging with each passing month. The transformation of Grin from a sleepy agricultural community into a center of resistance began gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. As German forces pushed deeper into Soviet territory throughout 1941, villages like Grin found themselves caught between 2 worlds, the familiar patterns of rural life and the increasingly dangerous reality of occupation and resistance. Local men began disappearing into the forests, returning under cover of darkness with weapons and whispered plans. The village became a crucial supply point for partisan operations, with families like the Oleshkovs providing food, shelter, and intelligence to the growing network of fighters who moved like ghosts through the dense woodlands that surrounded their homes. Sergei's older brothers Ivan and Andrei had already been conscripted into the Red Army, leaving the family diminished but not defeated. His mother and young Petya took on increasingly important roles in supporting the partisan network that had made Grin its unofficial headquarters. The boy himself, despite his tender age, became accustomed to the sight of armed men moving through his village at night, to the hushed conversations between his mother and strangers who appeared and disappeared like shadows, and to the growing tension that seemed to permeate every aspect of daily life. Yet in the innocence of childhood, he could not fully comprehend that his world was about to be shattered in ways that would forever alter not only his own destiny, but potentially the course of history itself. The summer of 1942 arrived with an ominous stillness that experienced partisans recognized as the calm before a devastating storm. German intelligence had finally identified Grin as a significant center of resistance activity, and plans were being drawn up in distant command posts to eliminate this thorn in their operational side once and for all. The villagers sensed the approaching danger, but their options were limited. Fleeing would mean abandoning everything they had ever known, while staying meant facing an enemy whose reputation for brutality had preceded them across the conquered territories of Europe. As young Sergei played in the village streets, completely unaware of the forces gathering against his community, the stage was being set for events that would transform an innocent child into one of the most unlikely heroes in the annals of warfare. The morning of that fateful day in the summer of 1942 dawned clear and deceptively peaceful over the village of Grin, with no indication that within hours the pastoral tranquility would be replaced by scenes of unimaginable horror. German forces, acting on detailed intelligence about the village's role in supporting partisan operations, had surrounded the settlement under cover of darkness, their vehicles positioned to prevent any escape, while specialized units prepared to systematically eliminate what they viewed as a nest of resistance fighters and their collaborators. The Wehrmacht soldiers who approached Grin that morning were hardened veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had been conditioned to view the local population not as civilians, but as active combatants in what German High Command had designated a war of annihilation. The attack began without warning as the villagers were beginning their daily routines, mothers preparing breakfast for their families, elderly men tending to livestock, and children playing in the dusty lanes between houses. Machine gun fire erupted from multiple positions, shattering the morning calm and sending terrified residents scrambling for whatever cover they could find. The German forces, following protocols developed through months of anti-partisan operations, moved methodically from house to house, seeking not only to eliminate suspected resistance members, but also to send a clear message to other communities that might consider supporting the Soviet underground. The sounds of gunfire, shouting in German, and the cries of frightened villagers created a cacophony of terror that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. In the chaos of the assault, Sergei's mother demonstrated the fierce protective instincts that had kept her family together through the most difficult circumstances. Recognizing immediately that their home offered no sanctuary from the systematic destruction being unleashed upon their community, she made the desperate decision to attempt an escape through the back of their modest dwelling. As bullets shattered windows and German voices grew closer, she pushed 6-year-old Sergei toward a rear door, her hands trembling, but her voice steady as she whispered urgent instructions that the traumatized child would carry with him into an uncertain future. The image of his mother's face in those final moments, determined, loving, and infinitely brave, would remain etched in Sergei's memory as the last connection to the world of safety and family that was disappearing forever around him. 10-year-old Petya had been caught in the village center when the attack began, and his attempts to reach home were thwarted by German soldiers who had identified him as a member of a family known for its partisan connections. The boy's execution, carried out with the methodical efficiency that characterized German anti-partisan operations, represented not merely the death of a child, but the deliberate destruction of an entire way of life. When Sergei's mother witnessed her son's fate and attempted to intervene, her own life was forfeit, cut short by soldiers who viewed such protective instincts as further evidence of the population's inherent hostility to German occupation. The systematic nature of the violence that consumed Grin that morning reflected the broader German strategy of collective punishment, designed to break the will of communities that dared to resist the expanding Reich. As flames began to consume the village and the sounds of destruction reached their crescendo, young Sergei found himself alone in the forest that bordered his family's property, his small body shaking with terror and incomprehension at the sudden transformation of his world. The boy who just hours before had been a carefree child in a loving family was now an orphan, thrust into a hostile landscape where survival would depend on instincts he had never needed to develop. Behind him, the only home he had ever known was being reduced to ashes, while ahead lay an uncertain path through dense woodlands where dangers, both human and natural, awaited a 6-year-old child who possessed nothing but the clothes on his back and memories of a world that no longer existed. The transformation was complete. Sergei Aleshkov had entered the war not as a soldier or even as a participant, but as one of its youngest victims, a child whose journey from this moment forward would defy every expectation of what was possible in the realm of human resilience and courage. The vast expanse of the Russian forest that swallowed young Sergei Aleshkov in the summer of 1942 was both sanctuary and prison, a primordial wilderness that had sheltered countless souls throughout history, while claiming many others who lacked the knowledge or fortitude to survive its challenges. These ancient woods, stretching for hundreds of miles across the Kaluga region, had witnessed the passage of armies and refugees, hunters and hermits. But rarely had they been asked to sustain a 6-year-old child whose only preparation for such an ordeal was the instinctive will to live that burned within his small frame. The forest floor, carpeted with decades of fallen leaves and dotted with the remnants of countless seasons, became Sergei's world as he wandered deeper into the green twilight, driven by an intuitive understanding that distance from the burning ruins of Grin meant safety, even as it also meant increasing isolation from any hope of human contact. During his first night alone in the wilderness, Sergei discovered reserves of resilience that would have seemed impossible in a child who had never spent a single night away from his family's protective embrace. The sounds of the forest after dark, the calling of night birds, the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush, the creaking of ancient trees swaying in the wind, created a symphony of unfamiliarity that might have broken the spirit of many adults. Yet somehow the boy found within himself the capacity to endure. Hunger gnawed at his small stomach as he curled beneath a fallen log, using instincts inherited from countless generations of ancestors who had survived in these same forests during times of war and hardship. His survival during those initial days represented nothing less than a triumph of human adaptability, as a child barely beyond toddlerhood learned to find edible berries, to locate sources of clean water, and to create makeshift shelters from whatever materials the forest provided. The psychological trauma of witnessing his family's destruction while simultaneously fighting for survival in an alien environment created a unique form of resilience in young Sergei that would serve him well in the trials ahead. Each day brought new challenges as he learned to distinguish between the sounds of natural forest inhabitants and the more ominous noises that might indicate human presence, whether friendly or hostile. His small hands became adept at fashioning crude tools from sticks and stones, while his keen eyes learned to spot the subtle signs that indicated the presence of edible plants or the proximity of water sources. The child who had once played safely in his mother's garden was becoming something unprecedented, a 6-year-old survivor whose intimate knowledge of fear and loss was being tempered by a growing understanding of his own capabilities. As days stretched into weeks, Sergei's wandering through the forest began to take on a more purposeful character as he unconsciously sought signs of human habitation that might offer some form of refuge. His encounters with abandoned farmsteads and burned villages provided both opportunities and dangers, as these locations often contained desperately needed supplies, but also attracted the attention of various military forces operating in the region. The boy learned to approach such places with extraordinary caution, his survival instincts honed by weeks of solitary existence in an environment where a single mistake could prove fatal. His ability to remain hidden while scavenging for food and supplies demonstrated a level of tactical awareness that would have been remarkable in an adult soldier, let alone a child who had never received any formal training in such matters. The crescendo of Sergei's forest odyssey came in August 1942, when his increasingly systematic search for human contact finally yielded results that would change not only his own fate, but potentially alter the course of the war itself. A reconnaissance patrol from the 142nd Guards Rifle Regiment, moving through the forest on a routine intelligence-gathering mission, discovered what they initially took to be the remains of another victim of German brutality. The small figure they found, covered in insect bites and bearing the unmistakable signs of prolonged exposure to the elements, seemed to represent yet another tragedy in a war that had already produced far too many orphaned children. However, as the soldiers approached more closely, They realized that the child was not only alive, but conscious, his eyes reflecting an awareness and intelligence that suggested reserves of strength that had somehow sustained him through an ordeal that should have been beyond the endurance of someone his age. The moment of contact between Sergei Aleshkov and the soldiers who would become his new family marked the end of one chapter of his extraordinary story and the beginning of another that would prove even more remarkable than his forest survival. The soldiers of the 142nd Guards Rifle Regiment who discovered Sergei Aleshkov in that August forest clearing were hardened veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had witnessed the full spectrum of human suffering that characterized the war between Germany and the Soviet Union. Their initial assessment of the 6-year-old boy they found was clinical and practical. Here was another war orphan, a victim of circumstances who needed immediate medical attention and eventual placement in some form of civilian care facility far from the front lines. However, as they cleaned the child's wounds and listened to his halting account of the destruction of Grin, something in his demeanor began to penetrate their professional detachment. The boy's eyes held a quality that experienced soldiers recognized, the unmistakable mark of someone who had seen too much, survived too much, and somehow emerged from the experience not broken, but tempered like steel in a forge. Major Mikhail Vorobyov, the regiment's commanding officer, faced a decision that had no precedent in military regulations or personal experience. The logical course of action would have been to arrange for Sergei's transport to the rear areas, where civilian authorities could assume responsibility for his care and eventual placement in an orphanage or foster family. Yet something about the child's story, his obvious intelligence, and his remarkable survival instincts suggested possibilities that went beyond conventional solutions. The Major's decision to officially adopt Sergei and integrate him into the regiment, as what the Red Army termed a son of the regiment, was unprecedented not merely for the child's age, but for the timing. The 142nd Guards were preparing for some of the most intensive combat operations of the entire war. The integration of a 6-year-old child into a frontline military unit presented challenges that no training manual had ever addressed, requiring innovations in everything from logistics to operational security. Sergei's official adoption by the regiment meant that he received not only a uniform tailored to his small frame, but also an identification number, ration allowances, and a defined role within the unit's organizational structure. His duties were carefully designed to keep him away from direct combat, while still allowing him to contribute meaningfully to the regiment's operations, delivering messages between units, distributing newspapers and mail, and providing the kind of innocent presence that could sometimes gather intelligence that would be impossible for adult soldiers to obtain. The soldiers' initial protective instincts toward their young charge gradually evolved into genuine respect as they observed his dedication, intelligence, and uncanny ability to adapt to military life. The boy's first major contribution to the regiment's effectiveness came during a routine patrol operation, when his keen observation skills identified what experienced soldiers had missed. While delivering newspapers to a forward observation post, Sergei noticed unusual activity in a distant haystack that the adult soldiers had dismissed as routine farm debris. His report led to the discovery of German artillery spotters who had been directing accurate fire against Soviet positions for several days, their elimination significantly improving the tactical situation for the entire sector. This incident established Sergei's reputation within the regiment as something more than a mascot or symbolic presence. He was proving himself to be a genuinely valuable member of the team whose unique perspective and natural intelligence could contribute to their collective survival. As the 142nd Guards Rifle Regiment prepared for its next major engagement, the transformation of Sergei Aleshkov from traumatized orphan to integral unit member was complete. The child who had entered the forest as a victim of war was emerging as something unprecedented in military history. A 6-year-old soldier whose courage, intelligence, and dedication had earned the respect of battle-hardened veterans. His small uniform, complete with the insignia of his adopted regiment, represented not merely a symbolic gesture, but a recognition of genuine military capability that would soon be tested under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The stage was set for the ultimate test of the remarkable partnership between a child and the soldiers who had become his family, the Battle of Stalingrad, where Sergei's actions would prove that heroism knows no age limit and that sometimes the smallest individuals can cast the largest shadows on the grand stage of history. The autumn of 1942 found the 152nd Guards Rifle Regiment, along with their remarkable 6-year-old member, approaching the outskirts of Stalingrad, a city whose name would soon become synonymous with some of the most brutal urban combat in human history. The industrial metropolis on the banks of the Volga River had become the focal point of German Army Group South's drive toward the oil fields of the Caucasus, while simultaneously representing a symbolic prize whose capture Hitler believed would break Soviet resistance once and for all. For young Sergei Aleshkov, the approaching battle represented not merely another military engagement, but the ultimate test of everything he had learned during his transformation from forest orphan to regimental mascot to genuine military contributor. The soldiers who had become his family prepared for urban warfare, with the grim knowledge that city fighting favored neither side, creating conditions where survival often depended on individual initiative and split-second decision-making rather than traditional military tactics. The regiment's entry into the Stalingrad sector in November 1942 coincided with the most critical phase of the entire battle, as German forces made their final desperate attempt to capture the remaining Soviet-held portions of the city before winter weather made further offensive operations impossible. Sergei's role during this period evolved beyond his previous duties as messenger and observer, as the chaotic nature of urban combat created situations where every member of the unit, regardless of age or official assignment, might be called upon to contribute to collective survival. The boy's small size, which had initially been viewed as a limitation requiring special protection, proved to be an unexpected tactical advantage in the rubble-strewn streets of Stalingrad, where his ability to move undetected through areas too confined for adult soldiers became increasingly valuable. His intelligence-gathering activities during this period provided his regiment with crucial information about German positions and movements, contributing directly to their ability to maintain their defensive positions against overwhelming odds. The incident that would define Sergei's military legacy occurred during one of the war's most desperate moments, when German artillery bombardment had collapsed the command bunker that served as the 142nd Guards tactical headquarters. Major Vorobyov, the man who had become Sergei's adoptive father and military commander, was buried beneath tons of debris from the direct hit that destroyed the underground facility, while other survivors of the bombardment struggled to orient themselves in the aftermath of the explosion. 6-year-old Sergei demonstrated the kind of instantaneous decision-making that separates true heroes from ordinary individuals facing extraordinary circumstances. His immediate recognition that his commanding officer was trapped beneath the rubble, combined with his determination to secure help despite his own injuries from the blast, represented the culmination of months of military training and personal development that had transformed a traumatized child into a genuine soldier. Sergei's actions during the critical minutes following the bunker collapse displayed tactical awareness and personal courage that would have been remarkable in an experienced adult soldier, let alone a 6-year-old child. Despite being wounded by shrapnel from the same explosion that had buried his commander, the boy managed to locate Major Vorobyov's position beneath the debris and attempted single-handedly to clear enough material to create an air passage. When his small hands proved insufficient for the task, he made the crucial decision to abandon his own safety and venture into the active combat zone to summon assistance from other units. His navigation through the battle-torn streets of Stalingrad, while wounded and under continuing enemy fire, demonstrated not only physical courage, but also the kind of tactical intelligence that enabled him to successfully locate and guide rescue forces back to the buried command post. The successful extraction of Major Vorobyov and other trapped personnel was directly attributable to Sergei's quick thinking and selfless action under the most extreme combat conditions. The formal recognition of Sergei's heroism came through Order Number 013 of April 26, 1943, which awarded him the Medal for Combat Merit, one of the Soviet Union's highest decorations for valor in battle. The citation specifically noted his courage under fire and his role in saving the lives of his commanding officers, making him not only the youngest recipient of Soviet military honors, but also establishing a precedent that recognized genuine military contribution, regardless of the contributor's age. The ceremony itself, attended by the entire regiment and broadcast throughout the Soviet Union as an example of heroism transcending all conventional boundaries, transformed Sergei from a local hero into a national symbol of resistance and courage. His promotion to the rank of junior lieutenant, while largely ceremonial, represented official acknowledgement that his contributions to the war effort were genuine and significant, rather than merely symbolic. The presentation of a trophy Browning pistol by a visiting general completed the transformation of the 6-year-old forest orphan into one of the most decorated young soldiers in military history. As the Battle of Stalingrad drew to its victorious conclusion for Soviet forces in February 1943, Sergei Aleshkov had already secured his place in the annals of military history as living proof that heroism recognizes no boundaries of age, background, or conventional expectation. His survival of the urban combat that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, combined with his active contribution to Soviet victory, represented a unique convergence of circumstances that produced one of the war's most extraordinary individual stories. The child who had emerged from the forests of Kaluga as a traumatized refugee had become a genuine military hero whose actions had directly contributed to one of the most significant Allied victories of the entire conflict. His story would continue beyond Stalingrad, as the 142nd Guards Rifle Regiment carried their young comrade through subsequent campaigns that would ultimately lead to Berlin. But the foundation of his legend had been established in the rubble-strewn streets of the city that bore Stalin's name. Sergei Aleshkov survived the remainder of World War II, continuing to serve with the 142nd Guards Rifle Regiment through campaigns that took him from the banks of the Volga to the gates of Berlin. After the war's conclusion, he pursued his education with the same determination that had characterized his military service, eventually earning a law degree in Kharkov and embarking on a civilian career as a prosecutor in Chelyabinsk, where his adoptive military family had settled. His post-war life, while successful and fulfilling, could never quite match the extraordinary circumstances that had made him a household name throughout the Soviet Union during his childhood. The man who had been the youngest soldier in military history passed away on February 1, 1990, in Chelyabinsk, just 2 weeks before his 54th birthday. His death marked the end of a remarkable life that had spanned the most turbulent decades of the 20th century, from the horrors of Nazi occupation through the Cold War era and into the final years of the Soviet Union. He had served so courageously as a child. His legacy, however, extends far beyond the personal story of one individual's extraordinary journey through the most destructive conflict in human history. Sergei Aleshkov's story serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit when confronted with circumstances that seem beyond endurance, and as proof that heroism can emerge from the most unlikely sources when ordinary people are called upon to perform extraordinary acts. His transformation from traumatized war orphan to decorated military hero demonstrates that courage, intelligence, and determination transcend all conventional boundaries, including those of age and experience. In an era when the surviving veterans of World War II are passing into history, Sergei's remarkable story reminds us that the greatest heroes are often those who simply refuse to surrender in the face of impossible odds, regardless of whether they stand 6 feet tall or barely reach the shoulders of those around them. The child who altered the fate of the Allies through his small acts of extraordinary courage has secured his place in history not merely as a curiosity or an anomaly, but as a genuine hero whose contributions to victory were real, significant, and enduring. His legacy challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about what is possible when human beings are called upon to rise above their circumstances, and serves as an eternal reminder that in the darkest hours of human history, the light of courage can shine from the most unexpected sources.